Esther locked eyes with Oliver, and he offered a soft nod of acknowledgement. Esther, it's been a while. 5 years without seeing your own sister, and that's all you've got? Esther smirked and pulled him into a hug. You've barely changed. Maybe a touch more handsome? Oliver smiled faintly, but before he could respond, the door to the operating room swung open. Dan was wheeled out by the medical team, still hooked up to an array of tubes and monitors. Oliver stepped forward with urgency. Doctor, how is he? He's stable for now. There's a clot pressuring his optic nerves that will cause temporary blindness. We could operate, but the risk is too high. Esther's heart plummeted at the doctor's words. Oliver frowned, struggling to keep his emotions in check. And if we were to bring in the hospital's top specialist, what are the odds of success? No one worth their medical degree would perform this surgery. There's a chance the clot may dissolve on its own. We're recommending a conservative approach for now. How long could that take? Varies. I've seen it take as little as 2 weeks, and I've seen it last a lifetime. The important thing to remember is that he's going to survive. Your brother is out of the woods. The news struck Esther especially hard. She knew all too well how difficult it was to lose sight. The only thing that had gotten her through it was an unyielding desire for revenge. The hallway fell silent, and with no questions, Esther and Oliver followed the doctor to Dan's room in the intensive care unit. Teddy met them there, looking like he had the world's weight on his shoulders. Dan's acting career. It's finished. Esther shot him a glare. If that's all you care about, you can leave. Teddy sighed. We've worked together for years, Esther. I'd venture that I know him better than just about anyone. I'll take care of everything with production's insurance, and send someone to follow up with you tomorrow. As Teddy departed, only Esther and Oliver remained in the room with Dan. After a prolonged silence, Oliver finally turned to her. Do you think we should get a second opinion on the surgery? Esther paused. No, not right now. He's been through enough. I say we wait and observe for a few months. Agreed. I'm just not sure Dan will see it that way. You know how driven he is. Oliver paused. I have to leave tomorrow, but I'll be back as soon as possible. Can you take care of him in the meantime? Of course. What's got you so busy anyway? Still spending all your time at remote dig sites? Oliver chuckled. I am, actually. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. As he unfolded it, a pendant attached to a worn black necklace gleamed in the room's fluorescent lights. The pendant was composed of 3 crystals. The centerpiece was a clear, deep blue, like peering into the fathomless depths of the ocean. The accompanying crystals, smaller in size, glowed a delicate pink. They sparkled under the light, creating a dance of refracted beams. Even to Esther, a woman well-versed in fashion, this necklace was a revelation. Her eyes went wide with awe. You found these? I've never seen anything like it. Suddenly, remote dig site isn't sounding so bad, is it? Oliver replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. He unlatched the clasp of the leather string and moved behind her. Believe it or not, I've been carrying this necklace around for years, waiting until the next time I saw you. He gently placed the necklace around her neck, and Esther dipped her head, feeling the cool crystal's gaze against her skin. She turned to look at him. I don't know how to accept this. You already have. Besides, it was made especially for you. Esther was at a loss for words, but the allure of the pendant was undeniable. She nodded gratefully. Thank you, Oliver, she smirked. But you know a phone call would have been plenty, right? Oliver laughed. Don't forget the remote and remote dig sites. How have you been, sis? Anyone special in your life these days? She shook her head with a grin. Not at the moment. You know me, work always comes first. The 3 of us seem to have that in common, don't we? Esther nodded, and they both glanced at Dan, still unconscious on the hospital bed. A palpable silence hung in the room until Esther's phone suddenly shattered it. Seeing Xavier's name, she excused herself and stepped outside to answer it. Xavier, why are you still awake? I told you I'd wait nearby to make sure you were okay. How's your brother? He's stable, but the doctor says he might lose his sight and there's no way to know if he'll get it back. Well, if he's anything like you, He'll overcome it with ease. Esther rolled her eyes at his corny line, but deep down, she appreciated it. Everything's fine here, but I'm going to stay until he wakes up. Go get some rest and we'll catch up tomorrow. All right. Xavier's voice softened. Good night, Esther. Good night. Leaning against his car on a dark street corner, Xavier hung up his phone and let out a long sigh. He turned to climb back into the driver's seat, but out of nowhere, 4 men sprang from the shadows, charging at him. Xavier lunged into his car, but he was caught by the ankle and pulled from the vehicle. Outnumbered and overwhelmed, he was quickly subdued and bundled into a nearby car. Less than a minute after the attack began, the car sped toward Rockaway Beach with Xavier's unconscious body in the back seat. When they arrived at the pier, the masked man hauled Xavier onto a speedboat and drove out to sea at full speed. When they were finally out of sight of the land, one of the men drew a knife and plunged it into Xavier's abdomen. The harsh bite of pain brought him back to consciousness, and he immediately fought back. But the relentless flow of blood from his abdomen zapped his strength. As he collapsed to the deck, he heard one of the men make a call nearby. "Boss, we've got him on the boat. We're about to dump his body. Anything else?" After a brief pause, the man glanced at his compatriots and gave them a grim nod, signaling the go-ahead. With that, they dumped Xavier's limp body into the water, and he slowly sank into the ocean's depths. Back at the hospital, Dan abruptly stirred awake with a fit of coughing. "Water." His voice was a gravelly whisper. The sound of his voice tore Esther from her sleep, and she quickly sprang to her feet. "Dan, you're awake!" She poured him a glass of water and fed it to him through a straw, watching with concern as he finished it in one go. "Take it slow. We don't need you choking on top of everything else." "Is that you, Esther? How can you see anything? It's pitch black in here." Esther hesitated, her heart pounding. "And why does everything hurt?" "You were in an accident, but you're okay, Dan. I'm right here. Oliver's here, too." "Then tell him to turn on the damn lights and bring me a mirror. I need to make sure the moneymaker is still in one piece." Dan forced a smile, his humor only making the situation more uncomfortable for Esther. "Come on now. We both know they're hiring you for your acting talent, not your face." Dan turned toward her and narrowed his eyes, her heart aching at the realization that he couldn't see her looking back at him. "Esther, I'm serious. Turn on the lights." Esther's voice wavered. "They're already on. Just remember, the important thing is that you're alive." "Very funny, sis. If you won't turn them on, I'll do it myself." Dan tried to rise from his bed, but Esther quickly intervened. "Listen to me. This isn't a joke, Dan. You had an accident and in your vision." Esther paused, and Dan's face twisted in horror. "I'm blind?" "I know how this feels, but remember, it's possible it's temporary." "What did the doctor say?" Dan's breathing grew rapid. "You fell from a stunt ring and cracked your skull. They did surgery to repair it, but a blood clot from your craniotomy is pressing on your optic nerves. The good news is the doctor said it could take as little as 2 weeks for it to dissolve. So let's just take it a day at a time, okay?" "Do you know what it took to get where I am today?" Dan's voice quivered with emotion. "The long hours working 3 jobs, the endless auditions, the constant rejection." His disbelief at the situation was palpable. "This was my shot, Esther. I finally got my shot. And now, just like that, it's all over." "That's not true. I'm sure you'll be back on set in no time." Dan waved her away, pain etched on his face. "You don't get it. I'm pushing 30. By Hollywood standards, I'm old news. If I have to start over from scratch, I don't think I have it in me." Esther's heart ached at Dan's sorrow. He had always seemed so resilient and inexhaustible to her. His success had seemed inevitable. But now, seeing the wild despair in his eyes, she felt a profound sympathy for him. His dedication and talent were undeniable, constantly pushing him down when the next rung on the ladder seemed just within his grasp. She opened her mouth to speak, but struggled to find the right words. Look, we don't know what the future holds, and assuming the worst will only make your recovery that much harder. I can't promise you anything when it comes to Hollywood, but I can promise you I'll support you no matter what. Dan chuckled, a hollow sound that was more like a sob. You always had a knack for sugarcoating the bitter truth, sis. Suddenly, he reached for something on the bedside table. Esther tried to step in, but he ignored her, swiping his hand around and tossing his medical records to the floor. Esther hurried to gather them up, but as she attempted to put the pages back in order, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. Dan's blood was listed as type A positive. Esther narrowed her eyes. She and her parents were all O negative. It was impossible for them to have a biological child with any other blood type. Just as her mind began racing with the implications, a pair of polished leather shoes appeared beside her. Oliver crouched down next to her, and his gaze followed hers to the medical records. He glanced at her, his voice steady. You figured it out then, haven't you, Esther? Esther looked at him bewildered. So, you and Dan. That's right. And you knew all along? Oliver nodded. Before we took our college entrance exams. Why didn't you tell us? Oliver glanced at the pendant around her neck, pausing momentarily before answering. I was afraid it would change how you felt about us. On the bed, Dan began flailing. You know there's a third person in here, right? What the hell are you two talking about? Oliver stood and responded with a gravitas that filled the room. Esther figured it out. Reeling from Oliver's revelation, Esther locked eyes with Dan, only to find no trace of surprise on his face. Instantly, her blood ran hot. You both knew? Is this why you blew off our dad's business too? Because you knew you weren't his biological son? Oliver caught Esther's arm, attempting to pacify her. Esther, sis, it is not what you think. We were just as shocked as you. We didn't know how to face you and your aunts and uncles. That's why we left. Esther pulled her arm away, her face stern. Well, isn't that convenient? Do you know how many years our dad spent blaming himself for you two disappearing to the ends of the earth? Do you know how it made me feel to have my own brothers up and abandon me? I'm sorry, Esther. Truly. Esther froze, inhaling a shaky breath. Then tell me the truth. How did this happen? After a thoughtful pause, Oliver nodded. Your father wasn't born into the Williams family. He was adopted by my grandfather after his own son died in an accident. Esther's eyes widened in disbelief. So, we're outsiders? Yes, but our dad only lied to your father to protect him, to save him the grief. So everything my dad inherited when your father died, it rightfully belongs to you? Oliver dismissed the suggestion, shaking his head. It's not about that. I make plenty as it is. I don't need anything from the family. Dan chimed in. All I've ever wanted to do is be an actor, and even if I can't do that anymore, I have no interest in running some boring construction materials firm. Esther's thoughts wandered to her father. He had never been business savvy, and the competition had grown fierce over the last decade. In truth, the company his adopted father had built was in decline. She had always assumed that one of her brothers would return to take it over, but it looked more and more like that responsibility was going to fall to her. She nodded and glanced between her brothers. I understand. I'll talk it over with Dad when I get home and fill you in. Thanks, sis. I'll be off-grid in the mountains for a while, but I'll get in touch when I'm back. You said that last time. Oliver pursed his lips, then met Esther's steely gaze. It won't happen again. I promise. Can you take care of Dan in the meantime? I'll do my best. But you remember how annoying he gets when he's sick. Esther and Oliver smirked at each other, and then simultaneously did a whiny impression of their brother. Mommy, I need my blankie. Dan groaned. Haven't I suffered enough for one day? When their laughter subsided, Oliver checked his watch and turned to Esther. It's past 3. You should get some sleep. I'll stay with Dan tonight. With a silent nod, Esther retreated to the neighboring lounge and sprawled out on the couch. That night, her dreams were a stampede of faces. Oliver, Xavier, Dan, and even her uncle. They seemed to be running toward a cliff for a reason she couldn't discern, and when they finally got there, Xavier lost his footing and tumbled into an abyss while everyone watched. Esther woke with a start, her eyes heavy and swollen with tears. A glance at her phone confirmed it was just 7 in the morning. Even though she'd only been out for a few hours, Esther found it impossible to get back to sleep. She sat up, rubbing her temples, before checking on Dan in the adjoining room. Dan was lost in a medicated slumber, and Oliver was slumped uncomfortably in a chair beside the bed. Hearing Esther come in, Oliver sat up, his voice gruff. Go back to sleep. Everything is fine here. Esther shook her head and glanced at Dan. How is he doing? You think he's accepted it? Oliver grumbled and stood up, pouring Esther a glass of water. He's always had his head in the clouds, so it's hard to know what he truly believes. But I think he's okay. He's grown up a lot. Just then, Esther heard a rustling at the door and turned to see Teddy entering the room. He glanced at Dan, then turned to Oliver. Can we talk privately? Sure. As Oliver followed him out, Esther noticed the bold print on the papers Teddy was holding. It was a contract termination. A lump formed in her throat as the harsh realities of Hollywood hit her all at once. Less than 24 hours after his accident, his agent had already given up on him. The man who'd built Dan's career, who had laughed and joked with him, who had seen him through relationships and scandals and disappointments, had abandoned him the second his acting career seemed in doubt. Suddenly, Esther yearned to hear Xavier's voice. She called him, but it went to voicemail, so she followed up with a text. Are you awake? A few minutes later, she received a response. Just got up. Sorry. How's it going? Dan is devastated, and I thought his manager was on his side, but he just showed up to terminate his contract without even asking how he's doing. I'm sorry to hear that. Goes to show how cutthroat the world really is. Before she could respond, Xavier sent another message. Speaking of which, an emergency came up this morning and I'm going to be out of the country on business for a little while. We'll get together when I'm back. Esther was disappointed, but knew that Xavier was as dedicated to his work as she was. I understand. Travel safe. I'll miss you, came the reply, followed by a kiss emoji. Esther chuckled. Apparently, Xavier was growing a soft spot. She responded with a kiss emoji of her own and put her phone away. When Dan woke again, Oliver informed him about the contract termination, and he nodded subtly, staring into the void with vacant eyes. Once again, Oliver had to leave for work, and afraid that Dan might sink further into despair, Esther resolved to stay by his side until he was able to leave the hospital. The next morning, Nancy called Jonathan on her way from the Bright Star office to the research lab in Brooklyn. He answered quickly, with a smirking tone in his voice. Well, look who it is. You left so early this morning I was worried my wife had run out on me. You'd know if I had run out on you, because I would have taken all your watches. Good to know. Everything okay at Bright Star? Better than okay. My team is moving faster than I ever imagined, and I think we'll be able to produce affordable, realistic hologram technology within the year. I'm not even a gamer, and I'm still excited to try it. Not to mention all of the corporate and advertising applications. Sounds like your first solo project is ready to take off. I'm already making plans to take it public in the next 2 years. Don't worry, I'll find a spot on the board for my trophy husband. Jonathan laughed. I'm a simple man. All I need is 3 square meals and a little TLC when you get home in the evenings. Don't worry, I'm tall and handsome. It's a bargain. Speaking of which, we're still set for the vehicle launch tomorrow, right? Just waiting for your confirmation, and I'll send the press release to the wolves. You know what? You make an excellent secretary." Before Jonathan could protest, she hung up. When Nancy arrived at the research facility, she found herself face to face with the first production model of the Davis Group's newest autonomous vehicle, the Valkyrie. It had come together quickly over the last few months, thanks to Peter's work securing new patents, and Nancy was eager to set it loose in front of the press. It boasted nearly double the horsepower of the Phoenix, while increasing storage and capacity and incorporating an all-new guidance system. It was by far the world's most advanced self-driving car. After running it through its paces, Nancy couldn't identify a single flaw. She sent a confirmation to Jonathan, and within minutes, he broke the news on Twitter, announcing a road test for the top-secret new car the following afternoon. When the hour of the test finally arrived, reporters swarmed the event space, eager for a scoop. Jonathan, Steve, Peter, Nancy, and Emma were all present, dressed to the nines, waiting at the starting line. Jonathan and Steve stepped forward to cut the ribbon, and Lexi followed, standing tall and radiant in a bright white dress. Holding a full glass of red wine to demonstrate the vehicle's smooth handling, she relaxed into the back seat and addressed the vehicle. "Valkyrie, start." At Lexi's command, the car hummed to life, and a dulcet female voice emerged from the central console. "What experience would you like during your ride? Relaxing music? An audiobook? Or a movie, perhaps?" Lexi turned to the cameras with a gleam in her eyes. "How about a movie? Make it something futuristic." With that, the car doors elegantly closed themselves. The movie flickered to life on a wraparound screen, and the car started forward. As it glided around the course, it effortlessly dodged obstacles, navigated traffic jams, and showed off its acceleration. Cameras inside the car showed Lexi nestled into the plush leather seats, delicately sipping her wine while she watched her movie. As Nancy watched the test on the massive video boards, she let a proud smile play at the corners of her lips. Spotting Jonathan staring at her, she allowed her nascent smile to bloom, and they exchanged a radiant thumbs up for all to see. This wasn't merely the culmination of their team's efforts. It was like watching their own child take its first steps. A sharp-eyed reporter spotted the exchange and promptly before the event had even finished. When the road test and press conference were finally complete, Nancy was about to depart with Peter when Jack intercepted her. "Ma'am, Jonathan would like a word." She stepped out of her car, and Jonathan extended his hand, leading her to his. The media swarmed, snapping pictures and shooting video, and Nancy shot a surprised look at Jonathan. Someone is feeling bold. Oh, I'll show you bold. With that, he pulled her into a deep kiss, knowing full well that his public display of affection would add even more fuel to the media's breathless coverage. When they finally slipped into the back seat of his car, Nancy caught her breath and narrowed her eyes. "Since when do you invite that kind of attention?" "Since it started serving my interests," he replied with a smirk. "And what interests would that be?" "Letting the world know I have the most beautiful, talented wife on the planet. And if they want to take her, they'll have to pry her from my cold, dead hands." Nancy's laughter rang out as she playfully jabbed him in the ribs. Unable to resist her infectious energy, Jonathan pulled the privacy screen down and leaned in to deepen the kiss once more. A few drinks, and she was suddenly reminded of Olivia, who had discovered her stomach cancer under the exact same circumstances. The thought brought a shiver of fear, and she rubbed her forehead, trying to soothe herself as she finished her shower. The next morning, Esther visited Nancy's office at Bright Star, enlisting Eduardo and the others to scan her for tracking devices. With no bugs found, she laid out her suspicions to Nancy, who promptly relayed them to Jonathan. His response was immediate and ominous. "Esther is right. Whoever she heard from, it wasn't Xavier." Thousands of miles away, the morning sun shone into a hospital room where Xavier was slowly coming to. Waking up to unfamiliar surroundings, His memories immediately leaped back to being kidnapped and stabbed. Seeing him awake, a girl beside him broke into an elegant smile. She was the picture of beauty, and her voice rang out like a sweet trill of an oriole. "Brother, you're awake. How are you feeling?" Hearing the stranger call him brother, Xavier frowned and remained silent. "Sorry, I haven't introduced myself. I'm Mackenzie, your youngest sister. You're in the Sloan family's private hospital outside Havana." Xavier froze. He was in Cuba? And there was a branch of his family here? What did this have to do with his attack? As he sorted through his thoughts, a male voice echoed from the corridor outside. "Mackenzie, is he awake?" "Xavier, meet your cousin Gavin." Gavin greeted him with a toothy grin that flashed two large canines. "We were so worried when they rushed you into surgery. Glad to see you're okay, cousin." Something about the way he spoke jarred Xavier. His words were kind, but his tone was icy, and Xavier couldn't shake the feeling that he'd heard the voice somewhere before. Was it on the boat after he'd been stabbed? Thinking fast, Xavier decided to play dumb and fish for more information. He shook his head and looked between them with a blank expression. "I don't know what you two are talking about. Are you saying you don't remember who you are?" Xavier feigned confusion, rubbing his head for effect. It was his first attempt at acting, and he had to hope his skills were up to the task. Mackenzie moved closer, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Are you saying you don't remember who you are?" "Xavier, you truly don't remember?" Xavier pushed her away. "Don't come near me." Unfazed by his reaction, Mackenzie studied Xavier briefly before turning to Gavin. "He's probably just tired, but we should call a doctor in case something is wrong." Gavin nodded in agreement and pulled out his phone, but Xavier could tell he was skeptical. This was clearly going to be a more difficult situation than he had hoped. A few hours later, Xavier was met with a new face, an older man with a cane, whose face broke into a smile upon seeing him. "Xavier, thank goodness. I doubt you know who I am, but my name is Carter Sloane. I'm your grandfather." Xavier was stunned to meet yet another family member he had never heard of, but he resolved to keep up his act of amnesia. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't recall anything about my past. Are you sure you don't have me confused with someone else?" Carter's expression tightened, concern creeping in. "You don't remember anything? Your parents? Your own name?" Xavier shook his head and noticed Mackenzie lower her gaze in response, a faint smile on her lips. Gavin, meanwhile, was preoccupied with his phone, seemingly indifferent to the entire situation. Xavier couldn't be sure what their angle was, but he was certain he couldn't trust them. Observing Xavier, Carter's face morphed into a deep frown, and he left the room with a sigh, signaling to Mackenzie and Gavin to follow him. Xavier knew he'd disappointed the elderly man, but at least for now he was safe. Yet upon waking, he realized that his accident had happened days ago. He was off the grid, wondering if Esther knew about his predicament, or if Jonathan had somehow uncovered his whereabouts. Finally, alone, Xavier glanced around the room and noticed a cell phone lying on the table next to him. He picked it up and noticed it had been 3 days since his attack. Did Esther have any idea what had happened to him? Or did she think he had abandoned her? His heart pounded at the thought, and he moved to unlock his phone. But just then, he noticed a security camera in the far corner of the room. Recalling Gavin and Mackenzie's strange behavior, he stopped before putting in the passcode. If they were monitoring him, it would be a dead giveaway that he was faking his amnesia. He'd have to find another way to call for help. In the security room next door, Gavin sat chewing gum, a cruel, cold smile replacing his previous carefree grin. His gaze was glued to the monitor, watching as Xavier stared at his phone. "Well, well, well. Let's see how serious this memory loss actually is, big brother." Xavier tapped a few numbers in, but the phone didn't unlock. Gavin furrowed his brow and watched as Xavier tried 3 more times, each time failing to open the phone. Finally, he winced in frustration, and the phone slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the floor. Gavin flashed his eyebrows. I'm on to you, Xavier, and when you slip, I'll be right there to catch you. Back in New York, Jonathan had just wrapped up a call with Jack and turned to Nancy with a grave expression. Based on all the tracking data we could find, we had good reason to believe that Xavier has been taken to Cuba. Assuming he's with the Sloan family, he'll be safe for the time being. Nancy shook her head in bewilderment. I'll find a way to tell Esther, but given the infighting in the Davidson family, we shouldn't assume the Sloan clan is any safer. Is there anything we can do to help him? Jonathan shrugged. We have no reliable connections or assets that we can get there. We'll just have to hope he finds a way to get in touch. But tell Esther not to worry. Xavier knows how to handle himself. That same morning, Hannah arrived at the Times headquarters for her first day of work. She reported to her junior editor's office and was surprised to find the editor-in-chief, Quentin Douglas, waiting for her as well. She had met Quentin through her lawyer a few days earlier, but never imagined he would take such interest in a low-level employee like her. As she sat down, he held up her portfolio and narrowed his eyes. I know we agreed to hire you as a stringer, Hannah, but I've reread your portfolio, and I can't in good conscience offer you that job anymore. Hannah's jaw dropped. She struggled to contain her emotions, but before she could respond, Quentin continued. Your writing is simply too good. Hannah recoiled. What did you say? Your writing is too good to waste you as a stringer. I want to give you something you can really sink your teeth into. And your story about battling depression in a city where you're surrounded by people struck me as the perfect starting point. Hannah blushed. Thank you, sir. I was worried it might seem like I was trying to profit off my illness. Quite the contrary. It's a beautiful story with a unique perspective, the kind we see too little of nowadays. So what I'd like to do is send you on an assignment. You'll travel across the country, choosing overlooked places to live in and write about. They'll be portraits of America, but they'll also be anchored in your own emotional experience. How does that sound? I, it, that sounds amazing. I'd be honored. Now, it won't be easy, the junior editor added. You'll be on the road for weeks at a time, and we understand how difficult it can be to travel alone. Given your condition, are you sure you're up for it? Hannah narrowed her eyes and spoke with determination. If I told you I had no doubts about myself, would you assume I was lying? The two men exchanged glances, and then the junior editor nodded begrudgingly. Good, because I would be. I'm not afraid to admit my weaknesses, not to you and not to your readers. And that's what makes me the right person for the job. I already know what I'll call it. A long way from home. Quentin looked pleasantly surprised by her directness. That's exactly what is yours, Hannah. We'll get you set up with everything you need, and you can hit the road tomorrow. You won't be disappointed. Hannah rose and shook their hands before joining their lawyers in the conference room next door to sign the contract. After getting her expense account and rental car, she headed home to pack a suitcase and plot her itinerary. Her struggle with depression had defined so much of her young life that it was hard to believe she had managed to turn it into an asset. Though she knew depression could never truly be cured, for the first time in months, she saw a bright future ahead of her. The next morning, Brock stopped by Hannah's apartment hoping to speak to her. But just as he pulled up, he saw her packing suitcases into the back of a car before climbing in the driver's seat and pulling away. Thrown by the fact that she was leaving town and somehow acquired a car of her own, he made the spontaneous decision to tail her. Before long, Hannah led him out of the city, through New Jersey, and deep into Pennsylvania. He tailed her for 6 hours until she abruptly got off the interstate in downtown Pittsburgh. Brock's mind reeled as he tried to imagine what she was doing there, but he wasn't going to leave until he found out. When Hannah's editor told her to visit overlooked places, the first place she thought of was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city one everyone had heard of, but hardly anyone had visited. Its industrial past, beautiful architecture, and geographic position on the border between the East and the Midwest struck her as the perfect crossroads to start her adventure. Her family had visited once when she was a child, and the quaint, riverfront streets had always remained in her mind. The company had offered to get Hannah a hotel downtown, but she opted for a cozy studio apartment on a quiet street. It was modest and compact, but exactly what she needed. Once she finished unpacking, Hannah stepped onto her balcony and was greeted by a serene view of the river as it wound around downtown, glittering bridges crossing to and fro across it. It was a calming sight that warmed her heart and reassured her that she had picked the right place. As she stood there, lost in tranquility, a knock sounded from the apartment door. Hannah's neighbor was mid-meal when he opened his door to find Brock standing on the other side, wearing a black baseball cap and dark sunglasses. "How much to rent your place?" The neighbor laughed dismissively and began to shut the door, but Brock stuck his foot in the way. "This isn't a joke. Name your price." Brock stuck his arm through the gap in the door to reveal his brand new Rolex, and the man slowly opened it, looking Brock up and down. "How much are you offering?" Brock simply raised 5 fingers. 5,000? Brock nodded. "Fine, but I need 3 months up front. How about this?" Brock took off his watch and dangled it in the man's face. His eyes went wide, and he ushered Brock in without hesitation. "Honey, pack your things. We're moving back into the apartment above the store." When the couple had finally left, Brock breathed a sigh of relief. He had Hannah in his sight and could make sure she stayed safe. He didn't know what she was doing alone so far from home, but he was determined to protect her. That afternoon, Brock headed out to buy all the things he hadn't had a chance to pack: bedding, a whole new wardrobe, and groceries for his new kitchen. As he was lugging his purchases back upstairs, he heard a voice he recognized. It was Hannah. The setting sun had painted their apartment building in a warm golden hue, and Hannah was there in the yard, bathed in its radiance. She was crouching, gently comforting a stray kitten. Brock paused in his tracks and watched her quietly. Hannah seemed oblivious to his presence as she softly consoled the cat. "What's wrong, little angel? Did you eat something you shouldn't have? You look miserable." The kitty let out a soft meow as Hannah scooped it into her hands. "Don't worry. I saw a vet down the road. Whatever is wrong, we'll get you taken care of." With the kitten in hand, she pulled out her car keys and turned toward Brock. Fearing she might be angry if she knew he had followed her, Brock quickly turned aside and hid his face behind an armful of bags. As she brushed past him, he caught a whiff of her perfume that left his heart pounding wildly in his chest until long after she climbed into her car and drove out of sight. The following morning, Brock woke up early and stepped onto his balcony, only to find the kitten Hannah had rescued asleep on his deck chair. He narrowed his eyes and considered what to do with it, but as it stretched out in the morning sun, he couldn't help but recall how tender Hannah had been with it the day before. In all likelihood, he would never have noticed it in the yard in the first place, and now, because of Hannah's nurturing, empathic spirit, it almost felt as if they owned a cat together. The notion filled his heart with warmth, and he stepped back inside before returning with a stick of beef jerky that he slowly fed to the kitten. It couldn't have been any more than 2 months old, and would have easily fit in the palm of Brock's hand. Just then, Brock heard the sound of Hannah's balcony door sliding open. He slipped back inside his apartment, watching as she called the kitten's name, and it leapt back across to her balcony, sitting in her lap while she drank her coffee and wrote in her notebook. He longed to join her in such simple moments of bliss, but he knew that for now, This was as close as he could get. That afternoon, Hannah set out to get a feel for the city and track down potential avenues for her story. Avoiding the main tourist destinations, she found herself wandering the streets of an old neighborhood near the university, strolling in and out of cafes, perusing art galleries, and chatting with business owners, documenting each step of her journey with her notepad and her camera. After lunch, Hannah felt fatigue creeping in, and she was about to head home when she noticed an old woman trembling as she tried to cross a busy street. The woman's pace got slower and slower, and when Hannah noticed the lights changing, she sprung forward without thinking. Throwing up her hands to stop the onrush of traffic, she scowled at the honking cars and took the old woman by the hand, supporting her to the other side of the road and helping her onto a bench. Once she was seated, the woman looked up at her in appreciation. "Thank you for your help, dear. I don't know what happened, but I suddenly couldn't get my legs to move. I guess I'm just getting old." "That's no problem. Do you live nearby? Do you want me to call you a cab?" "Oh, that won't be necessary. My grandson runs the cafe over there, and I was just on my way to see him." Suddenly, the woman's eyes lit up with inspiration. "You know what? Why don't you join me for a coffee? I'm sure he'd love to meet the beautiful young woman who saved his grandmother. It'll be my treat." Hannah blushed, but reluctantly agreed. And as they neared the cafe, a young man in his early 20s pushed through the door and rushed toward them. He was tall and lean, wearing a faded t-shirt and skinny jeans. He carried an air of unapologetic confidence about him, and when Hannah locked eyes with him, they both seemed to momentarily freeze in place. Shaking it off, he turned to the old woman and took her arm. "I see you made a new friend, Grandma. Care to introduce me?" His voice struck Hannah as unexpectedly light and soothing, utterly at odds with his cocky persona. "This, darling, is Hannah. She helped me cross the road after a car nearly hit me. She's come all the way from New York for a piece she's writing, and I thought you might like to help her out. Hannah, this is my grandson, Charlie." Charlie looked her up and down and gave her a wink. "Thanks for rescuing my grandmother, Hannah. I'm not sure I can help you with whatever you're writing, but would you like some coffee? On the house." Hannah ordered a cappuccino and settled into the bustling coffee shop, glancing around at the eclectic mix of customers. When Charlie returned with her coffee, he set a ticket on her table alongside it. Hannah eyed it with surprise and then looked up at him. "What's this?" "It's a ticket." Hannah flashed a sarcastic smile. "You don't say. And what exactly does this ticket get me into?" "A show." "You're lucky I need this coffee, or I'd throw it at you." Charlie laughed. "All right. It's a show my band is playing tonight, at the Thirsty Crow tonight. They need a new house band, and we're up for the spot against a few other groups. The more people that turn out for us, the more likely we are to get it." "I see. So I'm just a number to you." Hannah smirked, inwardly surprised at her sudden instinct to flirt with a total stranger. "You're not just a number. You're number one." Hannah couldn't help but laugh and carefully put the ticket into her bag. "All right, Charlie the coffee guy. I'll be there. But if you stink, you're going to owe me a drink." "And if we don't?" "Then you'll be the centerpiece of my travel column in the New York Times." Charlie's eyes went wide. "Like the New York Times? Is there more than one?" "Holy cow. I gotta call my bandmates. See you tonight, Hannah." After dinner, Hannah got ready for the concert and gathered her camera and notebook. The thought of seeing Charlie again sent a storm of butterflies in her stomach. But she had to remember she was on assignment. If he didn't make an interesting protagonist for her piece, she would have to keep looking. Just before she left, she stepped onto her balcony to feed her kitten, but she spotted her back on the neighbor's deck chair taking a nap. She noticed an empty bowl of cat, whoever they were, pitching in like that. Noting the development in her journal, she resolved to meet her neighbor as soon as possible. Brock was sitting by his front door working on his computer when he heard Hannah step out a little after 9. He glanced at his watch at the notion of her being alone in a strange city late at night, so he quietly packed up his computer and followed her. After a 20-minute walk across the bridge to downtown, Brock watched Hannah stroll into a bustling music venue, handing the bouncer a ticket on her way in. Discomfort tugging at him, Brock hustled after her, only to be stopped at the entrance by the security guard. Brock briefly considered overpowering him, but realized that making a scene would only risk blowing his cover. After a few tedious minutes of haggling, he managed to bribe his way in for 5 times the price of a normal ticket. Putting his hat down over his eyes, Brock entered the bar and pushed his way to the front. He scanned the room for Hannah, his heart rate increasing with every moment she stayed out of sight. Finally, he caught a glimpse of her in the far corner. A group of young men was gathered around her, and Brock watched as a tall, slim man in a faded t-shirt touched her gently on the arm. The sight of another man touching Hannah sparked an inferno inside of Brock, and without taking his eyes off of him, Brock shoved his way up to the bar and drank 2 shots back to back. Whoever he was in for a world of hurt if he thought he could steal Brock's wife. Charlie was going over the set list with his bandmates when he saw Hannah walk in and froze in mid-sentence. She spotted him from across the room and started toward him, but before he could introduce her, the bassist Nolan beat him to the punch. "Damn, Charlie, do you know her? I think she's walking over here." Charlie was still at a loss for words, so the drummer Nina chimed in. "Relax, guys. I'm sure it's me she wants to talk to." Nolan scoffed. "Not if I get to her first." Just as Hannah got close, Charlie snapped out of his daze and stepped in front of the advancing Nolan. "Hannah, you made it." Nolan and Nina groaned in unison. "They're always here for Charlie." Hannah gave him a short hug and then looked around the venue. "This place is huge. You get to play here every week if you win tonight?" "Yup. The last house band here left because they got signed to a record label in New York. It's the best launching pad in town." "Well, I'm sure you'll do great." Just then, Nina cleared her throat, and Charlie rolled his eyes. "Sorry, Hannah. I'd like you to meet our bassist, Nolan, and our drummer, Nina. Guys, this is Hannah." Their eyes went wide, and Nolan shot out of his seat. "You're the one from New York. Don't worry. As soon as you hear Charlie's voice, you'll have no choice but to write about us." Hannah turned to Charlie. "Oh, really? Really? What's your band called anyway?" Charlie smiled. "Steel Trap. Get it? Because it's Pittsburgh." "It's not exactly rocket science," Hannah laughed. Nina finally stepped in, taking the 2 boys by the shoulders and pulling them away from Hannah. "Lovely to meet you, Hannah, but I'm afraid we have to go and prep our equipment. Grab a drink and we'll see you after." Hannah returned a warm smile. "Sounds good." She watched Charlie disappear backstage, then climbed onto a stool to take a few pictures of the gathering crowd. Before long, the bar's owner took the stage and the room erupted in cheers. "Good evening, folks. As I'm sure you all know, this is a special night here at the Thirsty Crow. We'll be picking our new house band tonight, and the choice is up to all of you. We've got 5 incredible groups lined up, and whichever one you dirtbags like the best will be the one you see here every Friday night. Now enough talk. Let's hear it for our first band, the Out Crowd." The audience cheered, and the air filled with the heavy, pulsating rhythm of punk rock. Hannah felt the hairs on her arms stand up. It was the first time she'd ever seen music like this live, and amidst the crowd's excitement and the musicians' passion, she couldn't help but be swept away. Her years learning piano and cello gave her an innate understanding of the talent at work in front of her. And the more she immersed herself in the performance, the more she found herself disconnecting from everything else in her life. Brock, Jonathan, her depression, her miscarriage. They all faded into the background until they were nothing but static. The night progressed with bands taking turns on stage until it was finally time for Charlie and his bandmates. The moment they stepped on stage, a ripple of screams swept through the young girls in the crowd. They shouted Charlie's name, but he brushed off their infatuation with a wink and a nod. He took the mic and began to sing, and a hush immediately fell over the room. Hannah leaned back in her chair and observed the people around her. It was as if they hung on to his every word. When the song finally came to its ruckus finale, the entire audience seemed to take a deep breath before erupting in cheers. No sooner had Charlie stepped off the stage than Nolan raced over to Hannah, a proud smirk on his face. "What did I tell you? Voice of an angel, right?" Hannah flashed a smile and nodded. When Charlie joined them, his gaze was locked on her. "Thanks again for coming, Hannah. If you're in town a while longer, I'd love to see more of you." Though his words were gentle, they carried an undercurrent of confidence, as if he had no doubt he would see Hannah again. After the adrenaline rush of the show, Hannah walked back to her apartment in a state of pure bliss, the crisp, quiet evening giving her heart a much-needed chance to unwind. She was so caught up in the moment that she failed to notice Brock following her in the shadows, his face radiating jealousy and rage. Back in New York, Esther woke up the next morning with an unfamiliar pain in her stomach. When breakfast and exercise did nothing to help, she recalled her unexpected illness from a few nights earlier and was suddenly stricken with fear. Olivia, her twin sister, had had the same series of symptoms before her tragic cancer diagnosis. After a quick call to her assistant to clear her calendar, Esther rushed to the hospital with her stomach twisted into knots. Just as she sat down in the waiting room, her phone buzzed with a call from Oliver. She took a deep breath and did her best to pretend nothing was wrong. "Hey, Oliver, what's up?" "I've got some free time this afternoon. Would you like to get lunch?" "Today isn't great for me. I have back-to-back meetings all morning and—" But an overhead announcement cut her off. "Patient Tricia Hilfer, please proceed to consultation room 3. Oliver's voice turned grave. "Are you at the hospital?" Esther hesitated. "Yes, but I'm sure everything's fine. Don't worry about it." "What's wrong, Esther? What's bothering you?" "After the other night, my stomach just hasn't felt right, so I thought I'd get it checked out. Totally routine." "I'll be right there." Before Esther could protest, he ended the call. To her surprise, Oliver was there in less than 10 minutes, just in time to accompany her to get her results. Her palms were clammy with sweat as they waited for the doctor, but Oliver gripped her hand tightly throughout, never letting go. When the door suddenly opened and the doctor strolled in, Esther's breath shuddered. "Just tell me straight, doctor. What's wrong?" "Well, Miss Williams, it would appear you have a significant gastric ulcer." She let out a huge sigh of relief, and Oliver looked at her in confusion as the doctor continued. "You're young enough that most of this damage can heal, but it's important that you pay close attention to your diet going forward. No high-acid foods, nothing too spicy, and no alcohol. And try to limit your stress. This could lead to serious problems down the road if you don't." "So it's just an ulcer, nothing else?" The doctor started to respond, but Oliver cut in. "An ulcer is serious enough, Esther, especially at your age." "I know, but after what happened to Olivia—" "All the more reason to take care of yourself. Why do you and Dan always insist on burning the candles at both ends?" "I'd say it runs in the family, but I guess that's not true anymore, is it?" After a thorough consultation with the doctor and a few prescriptions, Esther made her way home to rest. With her health concerns alleviated, her mind couldn't help but drift back to Xavier. It'd been days since they'd broken up, and no one had heard from him since. Jonathan had managed to track him down to Havana, but what he was doing there, or whether he was even alive, was anybody's guess. That afternoon, Nancy made her way to a promotional event for unique perfumes at a sprawling hilltop club in the Hudson Valley. By the time she arrived, it was already buzzing with celebrities and athletes, and she was shocked when a movie star she had always loved came up and asked her for a picture. Nancy's profile had clearly grown larger than she realized. When her portion of the event had finally wrapped up, Nancy wandered off to a nearby viewing platform to get some air. The vista below her was a resplendent patchwork of wildflowers in full bloom, an April spectacle that left her breathless. As she took in the serene view, she was drawn to a small, isolated cottage, nestled amidst the distant hills, its quiet image reflected in the shimmering lake beyond. The scene was simple, yet it struck a deep chord within her, summoning an image from deep in her memory. She strained to place it, and suddenly the memory clicked. The scenes to a painting that had hung in her father's study when she was a child. Her heart pounded as the realization washed over her, and she quickly dialed Jonathan's number, launching into a question the moment he picked up. "The Houston house where I grew up. It's still controlled by the courts, right?" Jonathan's voice came back tinged with concern. "Right, until Jacob can come out of hiding and claim it." "Good. Then I need you to have someone sneak in and take a picture of the painting in my father's office. It should be the only one." "Maria, what's going on?" "Just trust me. I need to see it. I'm looking at something that resembles it exactly, down to the details. Just get the photo." "All right. Consider it done." After hanging up, Nancy quickly snapped pictures of the view before her. In no time, Jonathan sent over the photos of the painting, and the parallels between them absolutely left no doubt. Forwarding the comparison shots to Jonathan, she waited less than a minute before he called her back. "You're right. It's the same place. Do you think it's important?" Nancy swallowed hard, anxiety threading her voice. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but do you remember the bronze key we found in my mother's safe in Houston?" "You suspect it's for that house?" "It's just a feeling, but I have to find out. Can you bring the key and meet me here?" 2 hours later, under the cloak of darkness, Jonathan and Nancy departed the mountaintop, crossing the Hudson and heading straight for the isolated hillside. Darkness had fallen by the time they arrived. Flashlights in hand, they followed a winding footpath down into the overgrown valley, with two bodyguards leading the way. The entire area was choked with weeds and thorns, and it was clear that no one had disturbed the area in years. When the dilapidated structure finally emerged through the brush, just after 9 o'clock, Nancy felt her race pulsing. This was it, the cottage from the painting, and whatever secrets it held inside. The courtyard was eerily silent, covered in layers of dust and leaves, evidence of years of neglect. Jonathan signaled to a bodyguard, who groaned open the weathered door, revealing a dim, musty interior. Once the coast was clear, Jonathan and Nancy entered, finding sparse antique furniture scarred by the passage of time. The simple furnishings hinted at a cultured former resident, and a study off the main room contained century-old relics of learning, now dilapidated. Signs of tampering suggested occasional trespassing by villagers over the years, but nothing seemed amiss until they entered a bedroom. Jonathan noticed an oddly placed cabinet in the corner of the room. Moving it aside, he revealed a hidden bronze door set into the floor. Nancy gasped. "A hidden passage! How did you know it was there?" "Who puts a cabinet in the corner?" Jonathan dusted off the lock and inserted an ornate bronze key that turned with ease. As the door creaked open, they peered down to see a hand-dug tunnel. Descending cautiously, Nancy marveled at the spacious underground chamber on the other side. Jonathan's flashlight cut through the dark and illuminated an astonishing sight. A massive, secret library. Ancient tombs and scrolls lined countless shelves, and as Nancy browsed, she discovered titles referencing herbalism, the origins of surgical techniques, and handwritten accounts of medical trials by the Jung family throughout the ages. It suddenly became clear to her. They had discovered her ancestors' personal library. Nancy's mind reeled as she stood amidst generations of preserved knowledge, desperate to learn what secrets about her family might be written on the countless pages before her. Unexpectedly, Jonathan seemed to share in her awe. He had always been a man of extraordinarily even temper, but when she locked eyes with him in the cavernous room, it was clear that they were both feeling the weight of their discovery. Suddenly, Nancy was stricken by a heart-wrenching thought. It was clear that despite possessing the key for his entire life, Nancy's father had never known this library existed. She couldn't help but wonder whether his surgical brilliance stemmed from his ancestry, and how much more he might have accomplished had he known about his predecessor's tireless work. As Nancy recognized the immense value surrounding her, her sorrow for her father was replaced by her determination to preserve her family's legacy. She turned to Jonathan with wide eyes. "We can't leave this here, right? It's a miracle it lasted this long." "I agree. We'll have them packed and moved into my place until we find something more suitable. God knows what kind of medical secrets might have been lost if we hadn't found this." Under the cover of night, Jonathan, Nancy, and their team painstakingly packed the tombs into suitcases. Nestled below the mountain, in a well-sealed chamber, many of the books had miraculously escaped decay, leaving the ancient texts remarkably intact. While packing, Nancy stumbled upon a diary penned by her own grandfather. Cracking it open, she discovered page after page of medical exploits, interspersed with haunting accounts of his experience fleeing the Nazis with his family before returning to fight in the resistance. Though she had never met her grandparents, it brought her unexpected comfort to know that they, too, had fought against terrible odds and emerged victorious. Leafing through her grandfather's journal on the ride home, Nancy was lost in thought when Jonathan nudged her. "What's wrong, Maria? This is an exciting find, isn't it?" "Of course! I just can't help but wonder what I would have done if I'd discovered it sooner. Would I have become a doctor? Would my entire life be different?" Jonathan wrapped a protective arm around her. "The things you've done will have just as big of impact on society. Imagine how much safer the roads will be when everyone is riding in one of your autonomous vehicles. Car accidents will be a thing of the past." Nancy nodded. "I guess you're right. I just hate the thought of my family's legacy dying with me." "Then don't let it. Preserve it for our children, and their children after them." Nancy smiled and kissed Jonathan softly, nestling into his arms for the remainder of the ride home. In the days that followed, Jonathan's schedule was completely swallowed by the release of the Davis Group's newest autonomous car, the Valkyrie. Though the date was still a month away, he had to ensure their manufacturing was at full capacity, formally announce the date to the press, and proceed to the inevitable tsunami of pre-orders. And that wasn't all. Jonathan's intensive research on the Davidson family had turned up multiple links between the family's fortune and one of the largest car manufacturers in China. Sensing an opportunity, Jonathan planned to use the Valkyrie to disrupt their business and force the leader of the Davison family out of the woodwork. Thus, when the day of the press conference finally arrived, Jonathan included a bit of news that stunned even the keenest industry analysts. The Davis Group would be launching the Valkyrie in every corner of the globe on the same day. It was an audacious attempt to corner the AV market all over the world, and the Davis Group stocks immediately soared on the news. No sooner had Jonathan returned to his office than he received a call from an unknown number. Smirking with anticipation, he picked up. "Who is this?" A hearty laugh rang through, followed by the voice of a gruff man in his 60s. "No, no, Jonathan. Don't play stupid. We both know you aren't. I watched your press conference today." "What did you think?" "Got my attention. That was the point, wasn't it?" Keeping his tone steady, Jonathan replied. Should I call you Uncle? More laughter crackled over the line. Please, call me Matthew. I assume you also figured out that I was responsible for your little visit to Havana last month. And if my read is correct, you're the reason I made it out alive. You did that yourself. I just gave you a little boost. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. And the reason for your call? You want me to back off in the Asian markets? Not at all. The competition will only drive up prices on the rare earth metals we supply. Besides, this isn't a business call. I'd like you to come for a visit. And bring your wife. Jonathan paused, and Matthew continued. With your father gone, I've taken his place at the top of the family. I admit your father and I had our differences, but I think it's high time I met my niece-in-law. And you met your cousins. Jonathan was preoccupied with the call the rest of the day and brought it to Nancy's attention as soon as they were alone together. She furrowed her brow and took a long sip of her wine. What do you make of it? My instinct is that he means me no harm. But that's clearly not true for everyone. After the danger I faced last time, I think it's smartest if I go to gauge their intentions, and you join me later if it seems safe. Nancy shook her head with a grin. Not a chance I'm letting you go back by yourself. Besides, if your uncle wanted you dead, you already would be. In all likelihood, he needs you more than you need him. So I say we show a united front and look unafraid. Whatever happens from there, we'll handle it together. Jonathan sighed at her resolve. Fine, but the first whiff of things going south, and you're on the next flight out. We'll have Jack and his team on standby for evacuation this time. We don't have to sneak past the government. Sometimes it scares me how naturally this comes to you. Nancy winked and stepped toward him, sitting on his lap with a flirty wiggle. That's not the only thing that comes naturally to me. 3 days later, Nancy and Jonathan flew to Havana with Norman and their bodyguards in tow. Thanks to Eduardo's handiwork, they breezed through immigration, and before long, they were pulling up to an imposing hillside compound just outside the city center. As they pulled through the gates and stepped out of the car, they were met with a breathtaking panorama. Overlooking the sprawling city and the glittering waves of Havana Bay was indescribable. Despite being a mere 90 miles from the United States, it felt like they had traveled to a different world at a different time. The compound contained over a dozen buildings in timeless architectural styles, interspersed with courtyards, sprawling lawns, and a helipad with 2 idling choppers. Within seconds, an impeccable butler approached and bowed in deference. Mr. Davis, Miss Miller, please follow me. I'll send valets to take care of the cars and the luggage. Jonathan signaled Norman and the guards to remain outside and keep watch, and then took Nancy's hand and led her through the courtyard. A symphony of fine furniture and fragrant landscaping lined the path toward the main residence, and when they finally stepped inside the entry hall, they were met with the sight of an old but vigorous man in a high-backed wooden chair. He was flanked by 4 men and 2 women, all younger, and if it weren't for the small sitting area nearby, it would have looked like an ancient throne room. The butler ushered them inside and introduced them. Mr. Davis, I present Mr. Jonathan Davis and Miss Maria Miller. Still gripping Nancy's hand, Jonathan nodded to the older man. Uncle Matthew, it's nice to meet you, Nancy echoed with a measured smile. Appraising his nephew from a distance, a coy smile crept onto Matthew's face. Due to the rift between his family and Jonathan's, he only knew his nephew through reports. But seeing him now, confident, unflinching, steely, ignited an unexpected gratification within him. Years earlier, a gunshot wound had left him unable to bear any more children. Then, within the year, his only son was killed by disease. Despite his lack of direct descendants, the desire to protect the Davidson legacy burned strong in Matthew's heart. He had worked tirelessly to build their empire from the safety of foreign soil, and over the last decade had become convinced that none of his other nephews possessed the requisite strength to captain the ship when he finally stepped down. And then came Jonathan. He had been hardened by the deaths of his father and brothers, and proven beyond a doubt that he was the fittest among them. He had rebuffed countless attempts on his life by small and large actors alike, and had still managed to grow the Davis Company beyond anyone's expectations. With every passing day, Matthew became more and more convinced that Jonathan was the best man for the job. The only question now was whether he would accept it. Smiling, Matthew stood and stepped toward them. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you, Jonathan. I hope you find our humble headquarters to your satisfaction." It was then that Matthew's gaze shifted to Jonathan's wife. He could admit she was beautiful, but by all other measurements, she seemed commonplace next to Jonathan. A talented engineer with a knack for programming, but a burnout for a father and an otherwise unremarkable family. Still, if she had won Jonathan's heart, she was clearly not to be underestimated. The regal reception hall came alive as Matthew approached Jonathan and wrapped him in a hug. They shared a stern nod, then Matthew turned to introduce Jonathan to the rest of his family. "Jonathan, this is your oldest cousin, Frederick, and his wife, Catherine." Jonathan's gaze met Frederick's imposing frame, his stern yet composed demeanor etched with wisdom. Though nearly 50, Frederick's fitness rivaled men half his age. "Frederick, Catherine, nice to meet you." "Likewise. I look forward to hearing about this new car of yours, Jonathan." "All the credit for that goes to Maria. Beauty and brains. Well done, cousin." Maria blushed as Matthew ushered another couple forward. "Jonathan, this is your next oldest cousin, Theo and his wife, Sarah." Theo's warm smile creased laugh lines on his gentle face. His petite wife extended an equally friendly smile to Nancy. Her chestnut hair swept elegantly atop her head. "Next is Alexander," Matthew continued. "Just months older than you, and still a bachelor." Alexander looked the most like Jonathan, but with softer features and brooding air. He pulled Jonathan into a sturdy hug, the similarity of their builds becoming even more apparent in the process. "Jonathan, Uncle Matthew speaks of you often. I've planned a huge feast tonight to welcome you and your wife. I hope all of us cousins can share a toast." Releasing Jonathan, he turned to Nancy with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "And I hope his muse will join us too." His casual moniker sparked unease in Nancy. She had yet to be addressed by any of the men, and the rigid power dynamics of this new family were becoming trickier by the moment. Before she could respond, Jonathan cut in. "Her name is Maria, and of course, she will be joining us." As Alexander stepped back, Matthew looked around as if someone was missing, and then glanced at the butler. "Where is Dorian? He was supposed to be here an hour ago." "He went to a horse race, sir. He didn't say when he would come back." Matthew's face clouded with rage. "Get him on the phone, damn it! Now is not the time for him to be out screwing around." "Right away, sir." With the introductions complete, maids in neatly pressed uniforms seated Jonathan and Nancy at the center of a long lunch table, and lively chatter soon filled the soaring hall. Intricate woodwork adorned the halls beneath a vaulted ceiling painted with ornate clouds and dragons, simultaneously filling Nancy with both awe and apprehension. It was clear that Matthew was sizing Jonathan up as a successor, and though she had no doubt in his ability to handle the situation, she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to navigate this place on her own one day. Needing some air, Nancy excused herself and followed a maid down a long corridor to a glittering restroom. After freshening up, she stepped out and nearly collided with a young man in riding clothes as he rushed past. Catching a glimpse of her out of the corner of his eye, he stopped abruptly and turned back. His eyes sparkled as he looked Nancy up and down, his flamboyant ego adding an undeniable flair to the sharp cheekbones and strong jawline possessed by all the Davidson men. My. And here I thought the only beautiful things in this house were hung on the walls. Who might you be? Taken. That's an odd name. What is it? Dutch? Before Nancy could answer, a passing servant recognized the man and called out to him. Dorian, there you are. Your uncle has been asking for you for hours. You better go see him. Can't you see I'm busy? He dismissed the servant with a wave and then turned back to Maria. Now, where were we? A hint of a smile played across Nancy's full lips. You want to know who I am? I'm your American sister-in-law. He paused before suddenly lighting up with recognition. You must be Jonathan's companion. His eyes roamed over Nancy's figure again, and she had to hold herself back from lashing out. Well, you can call me Dorian, though it sounds better when you whisper it. Care to try? He waited expectantly, but Nancy just pushed past him, heading back to the main hall. Undaunted, Dorian ran up beside her. A serious question. You can't be a day over 21. Why marry that old man Jonathan? I'm younger, stronger, smarter. Abruptly stopping, Nancy turned and whispered into his ear. You want to know why, Dorian? He eagerly leaned in, pressing his body against hers. Because as far as I can tell, he's twice the man you are. With that, she pushed him away, glanced at his midsection, and walked off laughing. Seemingly encouraged by her dismissal, Dorian shouted after her as they both re-entered the dining room. His shout silenced the hall, and Matthew's brow furrowed. Dorian, mind your manners with Jonathan's wife, and next time, show up on time or don't show up at all. Dorian feigned guilt. My sincerest apologies, Uncle. Then he turned to Nancy. Please forgive my boorishness. Nancy smiled graciously. Not a problem. I know how overzealous young men can get. I'm sure you'll find a little girlfriend one of these days. Dorian gritted his teeth in frustration, but the incident quickly passed as lunch was served. When the meal was finished, Nancy and Jonathan went back to their room to freshen up and prepare for the rest of the night. Nancy told Jonathan about her interaction with Dorian, and he promised to look out for her at the banquet later that evening. An hour before the feast was set to begin, the butler arrived to help Nancy and Jonathan prepare. Expecting traditional clothes in line with the compound's formal style, Nancy was pleasantly surprised to find a room full of modern dresses on par with anything she'd seen in New York. Jonathan wore a black suit with a crisp white shirt that fit her perfectly. The fine silk caressed her curves before flaring at the waist into an elegant mermaid silhouette, and a tasteful pearl flower adorned the front, adding an alluring mystique atop the sweetheart neckline. A stylist handled their makeup and hair, and by 7 o'clock, they were ready. The banquet was in the old mansion's grand hall, but upon entering, it was even more spectacular than Nancy imagined. Ornate circular tables draped in gold cloth filled the room, and an enormous crystal chandelier cast a warm glow over the space. It felt like a scene out of Great Gatsby itself. Sensing Nancy's distraction, Jonathan squeezed her hand and leaned in. Be careful what you eat and drink. Take only things you've served yourself. Shaking off her daze, Nancy nodded and slipped her arm through his as they stepped into the social whirlwind. The crowded hall fell silent on their entrance, all eyes turning to take in the imposing couple. Jonathan exuded the same authoritative elegance he always had, his crisp bow tie accentuating his piercing, dark eyes. Beside him, Nancy was a vision in blue, her minimalist makeup setting her delicate features against the lustrous allure of the pearl flower on her chest. Matthew had invited all of the wealthiest families in the city, making Jonathan and Nancy's outsider status all the more noticeable. As they drifted through the crowd, Nancy heard rumors rippling all around them. Is that the other Davidson boy? He looks just like Matthew when he was young. He's certainly more impressive than his cousins. But who is his wife? Never heard of her. Some college student from New York with a deadbeat dad. Seriously? How did she wind up with a husband like that? You know how things are in the States. No respect for tradition. Finally, Nancy and Jonathan found Matthew sitting at the far end of the hall with a group of stern-looking men. At the sound of Jonathan's greeting, he looked up from his conversation with a broad smile. Jonathan, just in time. I'd love to introduce you to some of my business associates. They've flown in from all over the world, just for this occasion. He put his arm around Jonathan and pulled him into the circle, conspicuously omitting Nancy. She was prepared to brush it off and continue on, but Jonathan protested. Maria, why don't you join us? Don't worry, my boy. She'll be fine. This conversation wouldn't interest her anyway. Jonathan was about to insist, but Nancy shot him a look. Go ahead. I've got my own businesses to worry about. The last thing I need is another one. The passing waiter offered Nancy a glass of red wine, and she hungrily accepted, taking a large swig just as two women approached. It was her sisters-in-law, Catherine and Sarah. There's the pretty young thing, Catherine announced. We've been looking everywhere for you, Maria. Come sit. We'll introduce you around. Doing her best to look excited, Nancy returned her smile. I'd love to. She followed them to a crowded lounge off to the side of the grand hall, where dozens of beautiful young people were chatting and drinking, golden lamp lit glittering off their sequin dresses and glossy shoes. Let's do introductions, Sarah started. This is Maria Miller, our newest sister-in-law from New York City. Nancy shook hands and introduced herself until Catherine suddenly cut in. Now that I think of it, I'm not sure I've heard of the Miller family. But you must do something special if you're married to Jonathan. Finance? Real estate? Fashion? Before Nancy could answer, Sarah interjected again. I heard they're in construction materials. Is that right? Nancy scoffed inwardly. She'd been around enough people like this to know when she was being set up. Smiling innocently, she locked eyes with Sarah. Actually, my family is broke, and my dad is in prison for tax evasion. Sarah nearly choked on her wine. Oh, well, then I guess Jonathan just truly loves you. Catherine laughed. Imagine that. Someone from this family married for love? Or at least for lust. I mean, look at her. She's gorgeous. Nancy faked a modest laugh, biting her tongue to keep from making a scene. Just be careful, Maria. Beauty fades, but money is forever. How do you think we got in here? Speaking of which, you see that woman talking to your husband? That's Mackenzie Sloan. Her family is the second richest on the island, only to the Davidsons. She must be the wealthiest unmarried woman for 2,000 miles. Nancy followed Sarah's gaze to find Matthew introducing Jonathan to a striking woman in a fitted white gown. She pulled Jonathan into an intimate hug, and Matthew's approving gaze told Nancy everything she needed to know. The entire night had been set up. She knew he wanted Jonathan as a successor, but now it was clear he was trying to get rid of Nancy in the process. He'd set up the banquet in an attempt to draw Jonathan's eye and drive a wedge between them, allowing Matthew to replace her with a woman of his choosing. As Nancy watched Mackenzie flirt with Jonathan, the sound of her surging heart drowned out the viper's nest around her. Just as she thought she was about to explode, Jonathan turned and locked eyes with her. As he and Mackenzie approached, Nancy couldn't help but notice that she moved with the easy confidence of old money. Closing the distance quickly, she stepped right up to Nancy, towering over her in 3-inch heels. But before she could speak, Nancy put an arm around Jonathan's waist and pulled him close. I see you've taken a liking to my husband. Unfortunately, this model is off the market, but I'm happy to show you some other Davidsons we have available. Nancy and Mackenzie locked eyes, tension simmering before Jonathan finally stepped in. Maria, this is Mackenzie Sloan. She asked me to introduce her. Mackenzie extended her hand with a curt smile. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Miller. Nancy returned the gesture. Likewise, Miss Sloan. I hear from Jonathan that you're involved in AI. Did you have anything to do with the Apex? It's quite an accomplishment. Nancy smiled. Thank you. I led the team. My. And you're already running a top multinational R&D division. Mackenzie hoisted her glass. Here's to you. Her words were supportive on the surface, but Nancy read the subtext loud and clear. She had clearly come into the position through connections or manipulation, not through talent. Nancy smirked knowingly as she cleaned glasses with Mackenzie, but Jonathan abruptly whisked away her wineglass before she could drink. His voice dipped, gentle as a lullaby. Maria, didn't we agree not to drink? We're planning on starting a family after all. Nancy locked eyes with him, and her irritation quickly subsided. He wasn't trying to control her. He was letting everyone know that she was going to be the mother of his children, that she was irreplaceable. As expected, whispers rippled through the women nearby. She's having a baby? Do you think she's already pregnant? She'd be the most powerful woman in the family overnight. Nancy squeezed Jonathan's hand to signal her understanding, and she turned back to Mackenzie. Maria might be young, but she's a top-notch engineer. She had every major corporation in the country sniffing after her, and it's not a surprise why. She single-handedly built out our automotive division. Since you're a fan of her work, I'm sure you know we're releasing the Valkyrie soon. Why don't I reserve one for you? So generous, Jonathan. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Maria. Jonathan glanced at Nancy. Now then, just because you can't drink doesn't mean you can't enjoy yourself. I saw some of your favorite desserts over there. Shall we take a look? I'd love that. Very well. Excuse us, Miss Sloane. Jonathan gave Mackenzie a courteous nod, looped his arm around Nancy, and led her away. After they left, a huge smile spread across Nancy's face. In a room full of powerful strangers, all colluding against them, she and Jonathan had triumphed with ease. She realized she didn't need clever tactics as long as he was beside her. They would always have each other's backs, and that's all that mattered. When they were finally out of earshot of the buzzing crowd, Jonathan poured Nancy a glass of juice and looked at her with concern. How was it? Did they give you a hard time? Nothing I haven't dealt with before. They were just scoffing at my family's status and trying to make me jealous of Mackenzie. Nancy shrugged, a wry smile on her lips. I couldn't care less. He studied her with a satisfied grin. Good, because none of them could ever compare to you. And once Brightstar hits the market, you'll show all of these narrow-minded women that your value isn't dependent on your family's wealth. When a woman builds her own way, that's where the true fortune lies. Nancy glanced over her shoulder, her eyes simmering with anticipation. You gave Miss Sloane quite the cold shoulder back there. I bet she's fuming. She's nothing more than a vain woman obsessed with status. Why should I spare her feelings? His smirk widened. After all, how many people here want us gone? And yet, here we are, unscathed. So we should just disregard them entirely? Why not? It's obvious that they need me more than I need them, and our enemies will be our enemies regardless. So we might as well draw them out in the open. Just be yourself, and don't hold back. If anything comes up, I'll step in. Nancy laughed, but paused when she noticed a middle-aged man eyeing her from nearby. She shot Jonathan a questioning look, but before she could ask, the man approached. There you are, Jonathan. I take it this is your wife. Indeed, this is Maria. Jonathan introduced her. Maria, this is Harold Sloane. He said Xavier is here and he's nursing a wound at home. Thank goodness. She turned to Harold and flashed him a friendly smile, suddenly realizing that he looked oddly familiar. Thank you for looking after Xavier, Mr. Sloane. We've been worried sick. Please, call me Harold. They shook hands, and Harold hung on to her for an extra moment, his scrutinizing gaze triggering a twinge of discomfort. Nancy's confident smile faltered as she returned his gaze. I'm sorry, do we know each other? Harold abruptly let her go, realizing his rudeness. No, I'm sorry. You just look familiar. He quickly changed the subject. Jonathan, please tell me that you don't plan on hightailing out of the country as soon as you arrive this time. Xavier's injury is healing well, but he seems to be experiencing some amnesia. If you could visit him, I think it would be a huge help. I'd be delighted. I was hoping to travel back to New York with him when the time came anyway. Good. I'll arrange a meetup as soon as possible. Just then, Matthew ascended the stage and quieted the bustling crowd. I'd like to thank all of you for being here today, family and friends alike. When my father moved our operations here after the war, people told him he was foolish, that he'd be run out by communists or strung up by anti-colonists. But 80 years later, his vision of unchecked growth and prosperity has reached greater heights than he ever imagined. In that spirit, I'd like to dedicate this gathering to the lost strand of our family that has finally rejoined the fold. Jonathan Davis, why don't you come up here and introduce yourself? Jonathan stepped on stage beside his uncle and waved politely to the crowd before Matthew continued. The cream of the Davidson crop, am I right, ladies? Now, Jonathan, we have a packed house tonight. Why not invite a lovely lady for the opening dance? Before Jonathan could speak, Matthew gestured to Mackenzie. Ah, Miss Sloane here. What a perfect way to symbolize the bond between our two families. With a respectful nod, Jonathan descended the stage and strode toward Mackenzie. But just as the crowd began to murmur about the symbolic changing of the crowd they were about to witness, Jonathan brushed past her and stepped up to Nancy. With a courteous nod, he extended his hand. Maria, may I have this dance? Maria smiled deviously and placed her hand in his. I'd be delighted. Jonathan escorted her to the stage, and the crowd fell into a stunned silence. Every eye in the room flitted between the striking couple on stage and the jilted Mackenzie down below. In that one, wordless gesture, Jonathan made it clear that he had chosen Nancy over the Davidson family's wealth and prestige. Not even the potential wrath of the Sloane family could cause him to second-guess his choices. With Nancy by his side, Jonathan swept a cold gaze over the crowd. I'm sure you all understand that if I'm going to participate in a special dance, I'd prefer to do it with my wife, Mrs. Davis. The room gasped, and Nancy shot him a surprised look, but Jonathan didn't flinch. As always, his subtext was perfectly calculated. He had been brought to Cuba to be assimilated into the Davidson family, groomed for succession, and separated from Nancy. Instead, he made it clear that he would always be a Davis, and he would always be Nancy's. It was nothing short of a public rebuke of his uncle, and a bold statement that he would bend to no one's will but his own. His declaration left the crowd awestruck, but their surprise quickly morphed into anticipation. Matthew Davidson was perhaps the most feared man in the country. He could project his power to virtually every corner of the globe, and Jonathan's open defiance of him was practically unheard of. The room was quiet enough to hear a pin drop, and even the musicians so mesmerized by the drama that they had forgotten to strike up their instruments. At the center of the controversy, Jonathan seemed unfazed. He glanced back at the band and casually raised an eyebrow. You heard the man. It's time for the opening dance. Caught off guard, the musician struck a discordant note before regaining his rhythm. The rest of the band quickly caught up, and the music filled the hall. Jonathan placed one hand on Nancy's waist, took her other hand in his, and began to dance. Despite the lingering tension, Jonathan and Nancy's performance gradually captivated the audience. Jonathan's strength and athleticism was the perfect counterpoint to Nancy's ethereal grace. Each twirl, approach, and retreat a feast for the eyes. As the music faded, Jonathan leaned in, whispering something in Nancy's ear. To the onlookers, it appeared as if he was kissing her. Unfazed by the many eyes on her, Nancy reveled in the thrill of it all, a deep-seated rebellious streak coming alive. She draped her arm around Jonathan's neck, and his smile widened. Ready to shake things up, Maria? A shiver ran down her spine, her voice barely a whisper as she met his gaze. I thought you'd never ask. With that, Jonathan let go of her and turned towards the crowd, still holding her hand. Everyone, I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you about an exciting development in my wife's private company. Brightstar is now under her executive control, and they'll be opening their first major game release to beta testing in the next 2 weeks. Let us know if you're interested. When I say you'll regret it if you don't get in on the ground floor. When Jonathan suggested shaking things up, Nancy assumed he was talking about a scandalous dance move, not using his uncle's carefully orchestrated event to blatantly advertise for Brightstar. Nonetheless, looking at the bewildered faces in the crowd, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They would never underestimate Jonathan and Nancy again. From the side of the stage, Matthew watched silently as the scene played out before him. He was well aware of the eyes trained on him throughout, awaiting his reaction to Jonathan's defiance. But he made sure that his weathered face revealed nothing. It was true that no family member had ever dared to challenge his authority so brazenly. But instead of rage, he felt only excitement. For the first time, he saw echoes of himself in one of his kin. He saw hints of the same unyielding pride and tenacity that had propelled him into his current status and elevated the Davidson family from a laughingstock to a global powerhouse. Finally, he saw an heir worthy of the empire he'd built. But he also recognized that such fortitude, while admirable, could present challenges. Jonathan was clearly so infatuated with Maria that he'd lost sight of her strategic irrelevance. Matthew had underestimated their bond, but he wouldn't do so again. As long as there were no children, he still had time. Watching their performance with a placid smile, his mind slowly laid out a plan to break them apart once and for all. Jonathan and Nancy exited the stage to a wave of stunned murmurs. And when Matthew declined to step forward, Frederick took it upon himself. Mounting the stage, he sported a genial grin that quickly deflected the tension. A round of applause for the beautiful couple. And if I might add my endorsement, I've heard incredible things about Brightstar's new project. My 10-year-old can't stop talking about it. Now let's not forget that we're here to enjoy good food and great company. Everyone in this room is family in my book, so let's dispense with the formalities. Miss Sloane, would you do me the honor of the next dance? She smiled and nodded, and with that, a semblance of tranquility returned to the banquet hall. Just then, Alexander's phone rang in the corner of the grand hall. Checking that no one was within earshot, he quietly picked up. What's taking so long?
He just passed the guard shack at the bottom of the hill. He'll be there in 10 minutes.
Alexander's face spread into a puckish grin. Excellent. Ensure Mr. Williams receives a king's welcome. I want everyone to know he's here. Thanks to Frederick's intervention, the dance floor filled with lively energy, and the crowd's attention gradually drifted away from Nancy and Jonathan. With a sigh of relief, Nancy excused herself to freshen up. But when she emerged from the bathroom, she found herself face to face with a familiar figure. Maria, quite the show you put on up there. I can only imagine how impressive it is up close. Dorian stood before her in a blue shirt, his wry smile exposing a row of gleaming white teeth, and his eyes alit with trouble. So your company is launching a new game? Count me in. Why don't you take my number so you can text me the info? Nancy smiled innocently. Thank you for the interest. It goes up on our website at midnight on Friday, so you better set a reminder. What, no exceptions for family? Dorian winked at her. All right then, I'll make you a deal. Call me your sister-in-law, and I'll get you a link. Dorian grumbled, his confident facade cracking. Honestly, what do you see in him? He's attractive, sure, but he's got no flair. Nancy noticed a hint of vulnerability in Dorian's eyes, and despite his arrogance, she felt a twinge of pity. He was clearly pretending to be more ruthless than he actually was. On the contrary, Dorian, He just has the confidence to know when to use it. Her comments seemed to catch Dorian off guard, and as he caught sight of Jonathan across the room, he let out a sigh. Honestly, I envy him. He clearly does whatever he wants, and there's no one to tell him otherwise. If I didn't have my uncle riding my ass all the time, I'd be just as successful as Jonathan. Either that, or you'd be dead. Dorian let out a laugh. We all have to die sometime. Might as well have some fun on the way there. Besides, he's 8 years older than me. I've got time to catch up. Dorian grabbed a glass of champagne off a passing butler's tray and threw it back in one sip. If you decided you're looking for a little more excitement, you know where to find me. Nancy rolled her eyes as Dorian walked off. She scanned the room for Jonathan, but before she could find him, the grand hall's door swung open dramatically, drawing the entire room's attention. A man in his 50s stepped inside with an air of steely confidence. He wore an immaculately tailored suit and had long, snowy white hair that softened his majestic build. Beside him was a middle-aged woman, her arm linked with his, her face showing the same lack of emotion as his. Nancy glanced over and initially wrote them off. After all, everyone in the room was wealthy and powerful. But before she realized what she'd seen, her head whipped back to them, her eyes falling on the crest that was subtly stitched on the man's suit pocket. It was unmistakable. It was the exact same eagle symbol that was tattooed on the man who tried to kill her. In that instant, Nancy felt her blood run cold. Thoughts came rushing back of James's attempt on Jonathan's life, of her parents' deaths, of her own suffering at the hands of Stark. If it hadn't been for the clan behind that eagle symbol, she and her parents would still be alive. Her family would be whole, and Jonathan would have his brothers. There was a blood debt to be paid, and the perpetrator was now standing directly in front of her. Lost in her anger, Nancy suddenly felt a reassuring squeeze on her hand. Jonathan noticed her cold, sweaty palm and was about to voice his concern when his gaze landed on the same man. Nancy watched a tempest of emotions flash through his eyes before he gently turned back to her and tightened his grip around her hand. You know who that is? It can only be one person. His name is Arthur. He runs the family. So he's responsible for everything that's happened to us. Him and his fathers and brothers. That's right. We should confront him. Let him know we aren't afraid. Jonathan nodded. Are you sure you're ready? If I can face Stark, I can face him. Hand in hand, they made their way toward the entrance of the hall and straight up to the man. Jonathan held out his glass of red wine. You must be Arthur Williams. Arthur put on a polite smile. I see my reputation precedes me. And who might you be? Jonathan's smirk betrayed his disdain. I find it hard to believe you don't recognize me. Beside him, Nancy glared at the man responsible for her family's demise, itching to tear him apart. If Stark and James were the blades that cut through them and their loved ones, then this man, this beast before them, was the hand that sharpened the blades and yielded them. Arthur's smile remained intact. You'll have to forgive me. I wasn't expecting such a large get-together. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Davis. I hope you'll be sticking around long enough for us to get acquainted. Are you asking or telling? Arthur roared with laughter. Your generation and his sense of humor. Obviously, as the head of the Davis family, you choose whether you come or go. I'm merely a visitor here. How could I possibly? Oh, but you can. And I happen to know you tried last time I was here. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. But luckily for you, I've been meaning to visit the Williams family anyways. I promised James and Stark I would pass along their regards. Is that so? Arthur adjusted his suit and smoothly changed gears. Here's a piece of advice, Jonathan, from an old man to a young one. Life is too short to dwell on the past. It's wisest to stay focused on the future. Don't worry. My focus is right where it belongs. That's why I intend to settle things. Well then, I look forward to it. Arthur reached out to pat Jonathan's shoulder, but he sidestepped. Just then, Matthew intervened. Arthur, what a pleasure. Matthew greeted him with a warm smile. The pleasure is all mine. Arthur motioned a servant to bring a gift. I was just getting to know your nephew. Seems he'd like to talk business while he's here. I'm sure it can wait for another time. Matthew glanced at Jonathan's stern face before slinging an arm around Arthur's shoulder and leading him away. Alexander brought some extraordinary brandy back from France last month. Let's go and sample some. Nancy's heart pounded as she watched the two men disappear into the crowd. Arthur had murdered half of Jonathan's family, Matthew's own nephews, but he didn't seem to care in the slightest. Apparently, their lives came second to profits. As her body began to shake with fury, Jonathan pulled her into his embrace. I don't give a damn about the wealth and power here. They think they can control everything, but I have a hunch they would crumble if they ever faced real opposition. Just give me some time. Once I unravel the Williams family secrets, I'll get justice for your family and my brothers. I promise. Nancy nodded. I know. In the meantime, stay alert and trust no one. I'm going to see if I can figure out what he's doing here. I have a hunch that one of my dearest cousins is responsible. Jonathan stepped away, and Nancy retreated to a quiet rest area in an adjacent room. As she contemplated all the angles at play, someone took a seat across from her, and she glanced up to see it was Xavier's uncle. He gave her a polite nod. What brings you to this quiet corner? I could ask you the same question. I've never been one for these parties, but it's not worth dealing with the gossip if I don't show up. How are you liking your first visit to Havana? Want the truth? Harold let out a surprised laugh. If I have to ask, I already know the answer. Nancy cracked a smile, reaching for her drink. She took a sip and realized this was the first conversation she'd had all night that actually put her at ease. Try not to judge the entire island based on this. Don't get me wrong, Cuba has its problems, but none of this is real. It's just rich people playing God. The real Cuba is beautiful, unlike anywhere else on Earth. Sounds like New York, including the rich people playing God. Believe it or not, I've only been to New York City once. I visited Xavier's father right after he was born. Nancy cocked her head. Why hasn't Xavier ever mentioned that you visited, or that he had connections in Cuba? Because I didn't tell them, Harold confessed. I only mentioned that our third brother had turned up in a foreign country and wanted to see him, but Xavier's father didn't want to speak to him, so I dropped it. Noticing Harold's distant gaze, Nancy followed up. Well, the city has changed a lot since then. I'm sure Jonathan could arrange a visa if you wanted to visit. It's never too late to rebuild bridges with family. Perhaps, he nodded. What about you, Maria? Has your family always been in New York? Nancy sighed. They have, but it's not much of a family anymore. My siblings are scattered and my father's in prison. I'm sorry to hear that. What's your father's name, Maria? Maybe I can help. His name is Chris. Chris Miller. A surge of recognition hit Harold like a lightning bolt. Maria had reminded him of someone since the moment he met her, and the floodgates had suddenly opened. Back when he visited Xavier's family in New York, he had recently lost his girlfriend in a tragic car accident. He was casting around desperately for a sense of belonging, and when Xavier's father rebuffed his attempts to connect their family, he reached for the same crutch he so often did in those days: alcohol. It was the night before he was set to return to Cuba, and he went to a bar near his hotel in Midtown. To his surprise, a beautiful woman sat down next to him who seemed to be having an equally difficult time. She suspected her husband of cheating on her and was worried that he was going to leave her and take away her 3 daughters. Taking solace in each other, they ended up in his hotel room, and their vulnerability quickly veered into a frenzied moment of intimacy. Waking up the next day, Harold felt a surge of guilt for betraying the memory of his recently deceased love, and disappeared from the city without another word. It had been years since he thought about it, but Maria's face had brought it all back into perfect focus. She looked exactly like the woman he'd met that night, and the name she whimpered as she cried into his arms about her unfaithful husband was etched into his brain. His name was Chris Miller.